"What's your rank, sweetheart?" The question echoed across the concrete training yard with just enough volume to draw a dozen amused glances, and within seconds, quiet chuckles rippled through the line of elite operators standing beneath the blazing North Carolina sun. No one laughed louder than Chief Petty Officer Ethan Walker, a decorated Navy SEAL whose reputation for impossible missions had slowly convinced him he could read every person within 5 seconds of meeting them. The woman walking toward the command platform didn't look like someone who belonged at the center of America's most classified tactical training exercise. Her uniform was spotless but understated. No flashy insignia caught the eye. No aides followed behind her. She carried a simple black folder under one arm, her dark curls neatly secured beneath her patrol cap, and her measured stride never changed despite every curious stare settling on her. To most people watching, she looked like another administrative officer who had accidentally wandered into the wrong part of the base. Ethan folded his arms and flashed the confident grin that usually earned laughs before anyone realized they were part of the joke. "Lost, sweetheart," he called out. "Personnel is 2 buildings over." More laughter drifted through the assembled teams. A few younger operators exchanged knowing looks, relieved that someone else had broken the uncomfortable silence surrounding the mysterious visitor. The woman stopped exactly 15 feet from the front row. She slowly raised her eyes to meet Ethan's without a hint of irritation. There was no embarrassment, no defensive explanation, not even disappointment. Her expression remained remarkably calm, as though she'd heard similar remarks so many times they no longer deserved a response. The morning breeze tugged gently at the American flag above headquarters, its steady movement the only sound after the laughter faded away. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she answered softly. Her voice wasn't loud, yet something about it carried across the training yard with effortless clarity. Ethan shrugged, as if dismissing an unimportant interruption. "Then humor me," he replied with a smirk. "What's your rank?" Several operators leaned forward, expecting hesitation. Others anticipated an awkward explanation about paperwork or scheduling. Instead, the woman simply looked around the field, studying the obstacle course, the communications vehicles, the helicopters circling in the distance, and the rows of highly trained personnel waiting for the day's evaluation to begin. Her eyes lingered on details most people ignored: a radio left unsecured, a briefing board positioned where sunlight obscured half the map, an unmanned equipment cart blocking an emergency lane. She noticed everything without writing down a single note. Ethan mistook her silence for uncertainty. "That's what I thought," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't exactly the place for spectators." A few members of his team laughed again, more confidently this time. The woman neither smiled nor argued. She simply adjusted the folder beneath her arm and glanced toward the base entrance several hundred yards away, where the distant hum of approaching engines floated across the warm summer air. No one else seemed to notice it. No one except her. The distant engines grew louder until every conversation across the training yard dissolved into uneasy silence. Yet Commander Maya Brooks never turned toward the approaching convoy. She continued studying the field with the same quiet focus that had unsettled people throughout her 24-year military career. She had learned long ago that authority announced itself best through discipline rather than volume. Growing up in Savannah, Georgia, as the daughter of an Air Force logistics officer and a public school teacher, Maya had been taught that excellence was not something to display. It was something to practice every single day, especially when no one was watching. While other children spent weekends at the beach, she often sat beside her father as he spread maps across the kitchen table, explaining how one overlooked detail could change the outcome of an entire operation. Those lessons stayed with her through the United States Military Academy, advanced strategic command programs, and assignments that rarely appeared in newspapers because success meant nobody outside the room would ever know her name. Recognition had never interested her. Responsibility had. Even now, standing in front of one of the nation's most respected special operations units, she carried herself less like someone expecting respect and more like someone carrying an obligation too important to waste on pride. She quietly noticed that several operators had positioned themselves where the morning sun reflected directly into their optics. 2 armored response vehicles set only a few feet apart, limiting emergency maneuverability if an evacuation became necessary. A communications antenna had been placed beside a portable generator, creating unnecessary signal interference during critical transmissions. None of those mistakes would matter during an ordinary demonstration, but this was not an ordinary demonstration. It was a readiness evaluation designed to measure decision-making under pressure, and tiny oversights often revealed much larger weaknesses hidden beneath polished reputations. Ethan Walker remained convinced the visitor was simply searching for relevance. He leaned casually against a steel equipment case while several teammates gathered nearby, exchanging quiet remarks about the unfamiliar officer who seemed strangely comfortable despite becoming the center of attention. One younger SEAL, Petty Officer Daniel Reeves, lowered his voice. "Chief, she does not seem nervous." Ethan smiled without taking his eyes off Maya. "Confidence is free," he answered. "Competence costs a lot more." The group chuckled, although Daniel's attention drifted back toward Maya. Something about her composure felt different. Most visitors tried to impress elite operators by talking about credentials or famous assignments. She had not mentioned either. Instead, she slowly walked toward a large tactical map displayed near the command platform. Without touching anything, she observed the planned rescue route for several long seconds before quietly saying, almost to herself, "Interesting." Ethan overheard the single word and laughed again. "You see one map, and suddenly you are evaluating the mission?" Maya finally looked directly at him once more. Her expression remained steady, almost thoughtful. "No," she replied calmly. "I am evaluating the assumptions behind it." The answer lingered in the warm air, brief but strangely difficult to dismiss. Just as the first black government vehicle rolled through the security gate, and every military police officer near the entrance immediately stood at full attention. The convoy came to a smooth stop beside headquarters, but no one stepped out immediately. The engine settled into a low mechanical hum that blended with the distant sound of helicopter blades sweeping across the blue Carolina sky. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the line of black vehicles except Maya Brooks, who remained focused on the tactical display in front of her. Ethan Walker noticed that calmness and interpreted it as confidence without experience. In his world, the operators who had truly earned respect carried themselves with a certain edge, a visible intensity forged through years of impossible missions. Maya displayed none of that. To him, she looked composed because she had never faced the kind of pressure his team embraced every day. Ethan had spent nearly 2 decades building a reputation that few could challenge. He had deployed across multiple theaters, led hostage rescue operations, trained Allied special forces, and accumulated commendations that covered an entire display case inside the command building. Younger operators admired him because he demanded excellence. Senior officers tolerated his sharp tongue because his results usually justified it. Over time, success had quietly become certainty, and certainty had slowly become something even more dangerous. He no longer questioned his first impressions. He trusted them absolutely. Looking at Maya, he saw someone who did not fit the image of a battlefield leader his experience had taught him to expect. Around him, the members of his platoon mirrored that confidence. Petty Officer Daniel Reeves remained the only one who appeared uncertain, his attention moving between Maya and the arriving convoy, as though trying to solve a puzzle no one else recognized. The rest exchanged quiet jokes, convinced that whatever inspection was about to begin would quickly expose the unfamiliar officer as someone far outside their world. Ethan stepped closer to the command table where a large digital display outlined the rescue exercise scheduled to begin within the hour. Colored routes stretched across satellite imagery of an abandoned industrial complex roughly 8 miles from the base. Multiple entry teams, drone surveillance, evacuation corridors, and communication checkpoints had all been carefully synchronized after weeks of planning. Ethan tapped one of the highlighted routes with quiet satisfaction. "Every angle has already been covered," he said confidently. Maya studied the screen for another long moment before speaking in the same calm voice she had used all morning. "Every visible angle," she answered. Ethan folded his arms again. "Meaning?" Maya pointed toward a narrow service road running behind the simulated target area. "Your diversion depends on the assumption that nobody approaches from the west after the initial breach. That assumption is never tested. If someone adapts faster than your timetable, this entire route becomes predictable." Several operators looked at the map, then back at Ethan. He barely glanced at the highlighted road before shaking his head. That scenario is outside the exercise parameters. Maya nodded politely. Exactly. Ethan frowned. Exactly what? She met his eyes without raising her voice. Real problems rarely stay inside exercise parameters. For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. The silence lasted only a few seconds before one of Ethan's teammates dismissed the observation with an amused shrug, and conversation slowly returned. Yet Daniel continued staring at the overlooked service road on the display, unable to shake the uncomfortable feeling that the woman everyone underestimated had seen something important long before anyone else had even thought to look. The operations center finally signaled the beginning of the readiness exercise as a loud tone echoed across the training compound. Large digital displays illuminated one after another, projecting satellite imagery, weather conditions, communication frequencies, and simulated intelligence updates. Operators moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment, confirming assignments, and reviewing final instructions before deployment. Ethan Walker stepped confidently to the center of the command platform, his voice carrying across the assembled teams with the effortless authority of someone accustomed to leading high-stakes missions. He outlined the rescue scenario one final time, emphasizing precision, speed, and coordination. Every instruction reflected years of operational experience, and every member of his team listened without hesitation. Maya Brooks remained several feet behind the command table, silently observing the flow of information rather than the people delivering it. Her eyes paused on a live drone feed, showing the western edge of the simulated objective. A maintenance road, partially hidden by thick pine trees, disappeared behind a row of abandoned warehouses before reconnecting with the primary access route. She quietly compared the image to the tactical map she had studied only minutes earlier. The discrepancy was subtle, but it was enough. She stepped forward with the same calm composure that had never left her all morning. "Chief Walker," she said evenly, "before this exercise begins, I recommend updating your operational assumptions." Ethan barely looked up from the display. "Recommendations can wait until the after-action review." Maya did not move. If this were a real operation, waiting would already be too late. Several conversations stopped immediately. A few operators exchanged curious glances while Daniel Reeves slowly lowered the tablet he had been holding. Ethan sighed, clearly irritated that the interruption had happened in front of his entire unit. "Go ahead," he said with a polite smile that barely concealed his impatience. "Tell us what we missed." Maya pointed toward the drone image. "Your surveillance pattern leaves this western service road largely unobserved. Anyone approaching from that direction remains outside your primary detection window for nearly 4 minutes. Your rescue team will believe the area is secure because your planning assumes nobody will use that route. That assumption creates unnecessary risk." Ethan folded his arms again. "The scenario specifically states that route is inactive." Maya nodded once. "Scenarios are written on paper. Decisions are made in reality." A few quiet laughs surfaced near the back of the formation. Ethan smiled as though he had just won the exchange. "You keep talking about possibilities," he replied. "We work with verified intelligence." Maya answered without changing her expression. "Verified intelligence becomes outdated the moment someone decides not to follow your expectations." The words settled over the command platform like a slow-moving cloud. Even those who disagreed could not ignore the quiet certainty behind them. Ethan looked toward the exercise director standing nearby. "With respect, sir, if we stopped every mission because someone imagined another possibility, nothing would ever leave the ground." Several operators nodded in agreement. The director remained silent, choosing not to intervene. Maya closed the black folder she had been carrying since she arrived and stepped back without another argument. She neither defended herself nor repeated her warning. Instead, she simply watched the countdown clock begin its final 60 seconds while, beyond the security gate, the row of black government vehicles remained motionless, their dark windows reflecting the bright morning sun as though the most important arrival of the day had not yet truly begun. The countdown reached 0, and within seconds the simulation unfolded exactly as planned. Large monitors filled with live drone footage, digital tracking icons, and radio updates as every movement across the mock objective appeared in real time. Ethan Walker stood confidently before the command display, calmly issuing instructions while instructors around the operations center nodded with quiet approval. For the first several minutes, everything looked flawless. Entry teams advanced according to schedule. Surveillance drones maintained visual coverage over the designated sectors. Communication remained clear and uninterrupted. Ethan glanced toward Maya Brooks with the unmistakable satisfaction of someone convinced the debate had already been settled. "Looks like the assumptions are holding up just fine," he remarked without trying to hide the smile in his voice. A few operators nearby chuckled, eager to celebrate what they believed was another perfectly executed exercise. Maya did not respond immediately. Her attention remained fixed on a small corner of the primary display, where a secondary drone feed briefly flickered before returning to normal. Most people ignored the interruption because it lasted less than 2 seconds. She did not. "Your Western camera just lost continuity," she said quietly. One of the communications specialists quickly checked the monitor. "It is stable now," he answered. Ethan spread his hands as though the matter had already been resolved. "Temporary interference. Nothing unusual." Maya nodded once, but her eyes never left the screen. Temporary interruptions often hide permanent problems. Ethan exhaled slowly, clearly running out of patience. Before anyone could respond, another alert appeared on the operations display. A simulation controller announced that unidentified movement had been detected near the Western Service Road. The room grew noticeably quieter. Analysts immediately searched multiple camera angles, yet no clear image appeared. Ethan remained composed. "Probably environmental movement," he said. "Continue the exercise." Seconds later, another simulated intelligence update arrived. An opposing role player had successfully reached a position overlooking the rescue corridor by using the same maintenance route Maya had identified earlier. The exercise software automatically recalculated the outcome. Team movement slowed. Communication timelines shifted. Several green indicators on the digital map turned yellow, signaling reduced operational effectiveness. Nobody spoke. The room suddenly felt much smaller than it had only moments before. Daniel Reeves stared at the display, then slowly looked toward Maya with growing disbelief. She had predicted the exact vulnerability before the exercise even started. Ethan tightened his jaw as another notification appeared across the top of the screen. The rescue timeline had exceeded acceptable mission standards because of the unexpected approach route. Although this was only a controlled evaluation, the system recorded every decision exactly as it would during a real readiness assessment. Ethan quickly stepped forward and addressed the simulation controllers. "Reset the scenario." The role player acted outside the original planning assumptions. One senior evaluator calmly reviewed the event log before answering. "Negative. Adaptive decision-making is authorized under evaluation protocol." The words landed heavily across the room. Ethan remained silent for several long seconds before turning toward Maya. Pride prevented him from acknowledging her warning, but frustration found another path. "It is always easy to criticize from the sidelines," he said firmly. "Planning a mission and leading one are very different responsibilities." Several operators looked away, uncomfortable with the remark, yet unwilling to challenge their respected leader. Maya accepted the words without changing her expression. She neither defended herself nor reminded anyone that she had offered the warning before the exercise began. She simply closed her folder once again, standing quietly as sunlight streamed through the operations center windows, while outside, one by one, the doors of the waiting government vehicles finally began to open. The room remained perfectly still after the simulation ended, as though even the air had become reluctant to move. The bright screens that had filled the operations center with constant motion only moments earlier now displayed frozen maps, silent timelines, and a completed evaluation summary that nobody seemed eager to read aloud. Outside the wide windows, the morning sunlight reflected across polished concrete, turning the parade ground into a field of white light that almost erased every shadow. Commander Maya Brooks stood quietly beside the command table with her hands resting lightly on the closed black folder she had carried since arriving at the base. She neither celebrated nor appeared disappointed. To her, the exercise had never been about proving someone wrong. It had been about preventing good people from trusting assumptions that reality would never honor. Ethan Walker remained facing the primary display, reading the same evaluation notes again and again as though the words might somehow rearrange themselves into a different conclusion. His team waited nearby without speaking. The easy confidence that had filled the room earlier that morning had dissolved into thoughtful silence. Even the younger operators who had laughed before now kept their eyes lowered, replaying every conversation that had unfolded before the exercise began. Daniel Reeves quietly walked toward the western side of the operations center and looked through the glass toward the narrow maintenance road hidden behind the pine trees. From that angle, it was suddenly obvious how easily the route blended into the landscape. He wondered how many times he had walked past that exact location without noticing it. Maya slowly joined him near the window, stopping several feet away without interrupting his thoughts. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. The distant sound of wind moving through the tall pines replaced the constant voices that had filled the building throughout the morning. Daniel finally broke the silence. "How did you see it so quickly?" he asked softly, not with skepticism, but with genuine curiosity. Maya continued watching the trees sway gently beneath the summer sky before answering. "People often study the plan until they believe it," she said. "I study what the plan quietly asks me to ignore." Daniel nodded slowly, letting the words settle in his mind. They did not sound like criticism. They sounded like experience earned through years of careful observation. Across the room, Ethan overheard the exchange but remained silent. For the first time all day, he found himself questioning not the woman standing across from him, but the certainty he had carried into every conversation. Beyond the operations center, one by one, the passengers stepped out of the black government vehicles waiting near headquarters. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and completely unhurried. Military police officers immediately adjusted their posture. Administrative personnel quietly stepped aside. Conversations outside faded until only the distant flutter of the American flag remained. No announcements were made. No introductions echoed across the loudspeakers. The atmosphere changed without anyone needing to explain why. Maya glanced once toward the entrance, as though she had been expecting this exact moment from the beginning. Then she returned her attention to the quiet room around her, where every person was beginning to realize that the most important lesson of the day had arrived long before the most important visitors had even walked through the door. The quiet was finally broken by the sound of polished shoes crossing the concrete outside the operations center. Every conversation stopped without anyone giving the order. Through the wide glass windows, for senior generals walked side by side across the courtyard with measured confidence, each followed by a small group of aides who maintained a respectful distance. The military police, standing near the entrance, immediately snapped to attention. Administrative personnel stepped aside without hesitation, creating a clear path toward the building. Inside the operations center, Ethan Walker instinctively straightened his posture. Visits from officers of that rank were rare, and they almost always centered on strategic decisions far above the level of a routine readiness exercise. He quietly reviewed the morning in his mind, already preparing to explain the unexpected simulation results if anyone asked. The automatic doors slid open with a soft mechanical sound. Every operator inside the room stood at attention. The four generals entered without unnecessary ceremony, their expressions calm and composed as their eyes moved across the assembled personnel. For one brief moment, Ethan expected them to stop near the command platform where he was standing. Instead, they continued walking. Their footsteps echoed evenly across the polished floor until they reached the woman who had spent the entire morning standing quietly near the operations table. Commander Maya Brooks turned toward them with the same composed expression she had carried since arriving at the base. Before anyone could understand what was happening, all four generals came to a precise stop directly in front of her. Then, in perfect unison, each one raised a formal salute. The movement was crisp, deliberate, and unmistakable. No one in the room moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs as the impossible scene unfolded only a few feet away. The highest-ranking officers in the building were saluting the woman he had dismissed, questioned, and repeatedly underestimated. The senior general held the salute for a respectful moment before lowering his hand with quiet professionalism. "Commander Brooks," he said warmly, "thank you for arriving ahead of schedule. I trust your independent assessment has already begun." Maya returned the salute with equal precision before answering. "Yes, sir." The initial evaluation is complete. The general nodded once. Excellent. Headquarters has been looking forward to your recommendations. Your strategic review will shape readiness standards across multiple commands. A deep silence settled over the room once again. Several operators slowly turned toward Ethan, whose confident expression had completely disappeared. Daniel Reeves stared at Maya with wide eyes as scattered pieces of the morning finally fit together. Her observations, her calm confidence, her refusal to defend herself, even her willingness to let others underestimate her without argument suddenly made perfect sense. She had never arrived to observe one exercise. She had arrived to evaluate an entire culture of leadership. The senior general glanced briefly around the operations center before smiling respectfully toward Maya. It appears you have already identified several valuable teaching opportunities. Maya answered with quiet humility. The people here have exceptional potential, sir. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is not skill. It is certainty. Her words carried through the silent room without accusation or triumph. They simply rested there, impossible to ignore. Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time that day, realizing that the question he had asked hours earlier no longer mattered at all, because the answer had been standing in front of him from the very beginning. The generals moved toward the conference area with their aides, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any formal reprimand. No one hurried to speak. The confidence that had filled the operations center only an hour earlier had been replaced by quiet reflection. Ethan Walker remained standing beside the command table, his eyes fixed on the tactical map that had become an uncomfortable reminder of every warning he had dismissed. For the first time in years, experience alone no longer felt like enough. Across the room, Commander Maya Brooks reviewed several evaluation notes with one of the senior generals before politely excusing herself. She walked back toward the operations floor with the same measured pace she had maintained all morning, never seeking attention despite having every reason to command it. As she reached the command table, Ethan stepped forward. The room instinctively grew quiet again. Every operator understood they were about to witness something far more important than the simulation itself. Ethan removed his cap and held it respectfully at his side before speaking. "Commander Brooks," he began, his voice noticeably calmer than it had been all day, "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I listened to you. I assumed I understood your experience because I believed I understood what leadership looked like. I was wrong." The words carried no excuses and no attempt to soften responsibility. Maya looked at him for a long moment before answering. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no desire to make the moment uncomfortable for him. "Thank you for saying that," she replied gently. "Admitting a mistake requires more courage than pretending one never happened." Ethan nodded slowly. "I let confidence become certainty." Maya offered a faint smile. "That happens more often than people realize." Daniel Reeves and the other operators watched in complete silence as the conversation continued. Ethan glanced around the room before looking back at Maya. "I embarrassed you in front of my team. I questioned your judgment before I understood your responsibility. I cannot change this morning, but I would like the opportunity to earn back the respect I failed to show." Maya closed her folder and rested one hand lightly on its cover. "Respect is not something you earn back with one conversation," she said. "It is something you practice every day through small decisions. The way you welcome the next unfamiliar face. The way you respond before you know someone's story. The way you choose curiosity instead of assumption." Ethan listened without interrupting. Every sentence landed with quiet honesty rather than criticism. One of the senior generals observed the exchange from across the room and smiled almost imperceptibly, saying nothing because nothing needed to be added. Maya continued, "Your team is talented. That was never in question. But talent becomes stronger when humility stands beside it. The best leaders create environments where the newest voice can prevent the oldest mistake." Ethan slowly extended his hand. Maya accepted it without hesitation. The handshake lasted only a moment, yet it carried more meaning than any speech delivered that day. Around them, several operators exchanged thoughtful glances. Daniel quietly smiled, recognizing that the most memorable lesson from the readiness evaluation had nothing to do with maps, tactics, or procedures. It was about character. And in that quiet operations center, surrounded by sunlight pouring through the tall windows, Everyone present understood that true authority had revealed itself not through rank alone, but through wisdom, restraint, and the choice to answer disrespect with dignity. Several months later, the training compound looked almost exactly the same, yet something essential had changed. The same pine trees bordered the Western Service Road. The same helicopters crossed the Carolina sky. The same American flag rose with the morning light above headquarters, catching the first breeze of the day. New classes of operators arrived, carrying the confidence and ambition that came with earning a place among the nation's most respected special operations forces. They lined up on the familiar concrete, studied the same maps, and prepared for the same demanding evaluations. Chief Petty Officer Ethan Walker stood before them once again, but the man addressing the formation was no longer the same leader who had greeted an unfamiliar visitor with assumptions instead of respect. Experience had taught him tactics. Humility had taught him perspective. As a young logistics officer stepped carefully onto the training yard carrying a stack of briefing materials, several recruits exchanged amused smiles after noticing the modest uniform and quiet demeanor. One of them leaned toward another and whispered, "She probably took a wrong turn." Before the remark could spread any farther, Ethan calmly stepped forward. There was no anger in his voice, only quiet certainty. "Around here," he said, "we never measure someone by the first impression they give us. We measure them by the value they bring once we choose to listen." The group immediately fell silent. The young officer looked surprised, then offered a grateful nod before continuing toward the command building. Daniel Reeves noticed the exchange from across the courtyard and smiled to himself. He understood exactly why Ethan had spoken so quickly. Some lessons were too valuable to let history repeat. Inside headquarters, framed photographs from previous readiness evaluations lined one hallway. Among them hung a simple group photograph taken on the afternoon Commander Maya Brooks completed her strategic review. She stood beside the 4 generals and the evaluation team with the same calm expression she had worn from the moment she first arrived at the base. There was nothing dramatic about the picture. No one looking at it without context would guess how many lives and careers had quietly been influenced by the conversations that took place that day. Maya never requested recognition, and she never returned to see whether anyone remembered her name. She trusted that character left stronger evidence than reputation ever could. Her recommendations gradually reshaped training procedures across multiple commands, encouraging leaders to challenge assumptions before making decisions and to welcome thoughtful questions regardless of who asked them. Months later, those changes had already become part of everyday practice, so naturally that newer personnel assumed they had always existed. As the afternoon sun settled across the base, Ethan paused alone outside the operations center and looked toward the narrow Western Service Road that had once seemed too unimportant to deserve attention. It remained quiet, almost invisible behind the tall pines. Just as it had on the day everything changed. He smiled softly, not because he remembered being proven wrong, but because he remembered being given the chance to become better. The flag above headquarters continued to move gently with the wind, its steady rhythm echoing through the peaceful silence. No applause followed. No speeches marked the ending. Only the quiet understanding that real strength begins the moment pride steps aside and respect finally takes its place. This is the end of our story. Thank you so much for visiting our channel and spending your time with us. We truly appreciate every view, every comment, and every moment you share with our stories. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like to support our channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to keep creating more high-quality stories for you. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next video.